Okay, thank you everybody and welcome to our workshop, Tenants Housing Rights with Erie House. And this is a face-to-face workshop. Today's speaker, her name is Ana Solano, and she is a program manager. Ana, I will let you introduce yourself. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi, everybody. My name is Ana Solano. I am the program manager at Erie House for the Health and Leadership Department. And prior to my role there, I still worked at Erie House, but I worked with school-age children. And then during my free time, I'm a community organizer in Little Village.
Thank you, Ana.
I have my colleague here. If we can start sharing our PowerPoint presentation, please. Thank you. So yeah, today we are having the housing rights for immigrant tenants. And these are the names of the people that created the presentation. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so this is the Immigrant Tenant Handbook. And we're going to cover a few sections of the stuff that's in the handbook. Next slide, please. So these are the topics that are going to be covered. We have lockouts and eviction, fair housing rights, Safe Homes Act, immigration status disclosure and national origins protection, the Just Housing Amendment, Immigrant Tenant Protection Act, interpretation and translation services, public charge rule, and general housing rights responsibilities for landlords. Next slide, please. Okay, and these are things that we are all entitled to live in a safe, reasonably maintained home. We can ask for repairs to the rental unit. We can file complaints with governmental authority or testify in court about the state of your unit. We can also join a tenants organization or union. So the RTLO are the residential tenant landlord ordinances. And these are the rights and responsibilities by both the landlord and the tenant. And it is regardless of immigration status. So some of the things are property maintenance and repairs, fees for late rent payments, security deposits, protections against retaliation, extra protections against lockouts, and essential services. Next slide, please. Okay, and these are a few things. So anywhere in Illinois, it is illegal for landlords to threaten, attempt to, or forcefully remove a tenant without authority or the law. So it's illegal, and unfortunately, we still see it, but just keep in mind it's illegal. In Cook County, a tenant can sue a landlord for up to 2 months' rent or twice the damages sustained by the tenant, whichever is greater. And in Chicago, the city of Chicago will fine a landlord $200 to $500 for each day a lockout occurs. So lockouts are always illegal regardless of immigration status. And this is a chart that shows the eviction process. So it starts off with the eviction notice. So the landlord can personally give you a written letter, and it lets you know that you're being evicted. Then it moves on to court. So two things can happen here. If the tenant does not appear, then it's an automatic win for the landlord. But if the tenant wins, then the tenant can stay in the unit. And if the landlord wins, then it moves on further. And then you would have to move out. But just keep in mind at the end, the note, your landlord is never legally permitted to forcibly enter your home or remove you from it. So something to keep in mind. Next slide, please. So what to do if you are locked out or illegally evicted? You can call an attorney or a trusted housing organization. You can call 911, but be prepared to give the police your name and address, as well as the landlord's name and phone number. And this is one of the most important things. Make sure you have an ID that shows your address. Um, so in my free time, as I mentioned, I'm a community organizer, and we do have an eviction defense team. We have seen that sometimes landlords would lock out tenants, and the little short while they stepped out to go to a corner store, and then they find out that they're locked out. It's important for you to always have something that shows proof of address, because otherwise, they can just be like, well, do you have proof that you live in there? And if you don't, then that's an unfortunate circumstance. So yeah, make sure you have an ID showing your address at all times. And again, just to keep in mind, neither police officers nor a landlord may remove a tenant's possessions from a rental unit without an order from a judge. So this is a scenario. So I received a 10-day eviction notice from my landlord. What should I do? A, pack up my belongings and immediately leave my apartment. B, lock myself in my apartment and refuse to leave. Or C, contact legal services for assistance with my eviction case. If you want to try to guess what's the correct answer, you can type it up in the chat. C. Okay. Yep. Yay. Correct answer. Contact legal services for assistance with my eviction case. So, housing rights for immigrants. If an undocumented tenant must call the police, ACLU recommends to stay calm. Don't run, argue, resist, or obstruct the officer, even if you believe your rights are being violated. Keep your hands where the police can see them. You do not have to consent to search of yourself or your belongings. You do not have to answer questions about where you were born, whether you're a U.S. citizen, or how you entered the country. Anything you tell an officer can later be used against you in an immigration court. And don't lie or produce any false documents. Don't sign anything without speaking with a lawyer first. So the Fair Housing Protection Against Discrimination. In Illinois, housing providers cannot refuse to rent or sell to you, provide limited options, alter terms of rental agreement, or in any other way give you unequal treatment because of your race, color, national origin, religion, ancestry, familial status, disability, age 40 and over, marital status, military discharge, sex, pregnancy, order of protection status, or sexual orientation. So if you are experiencing discrimination, you can record every incident possible, including dates, names, and locations, and you could report it to housing discrimination, to a housing advocacy organization, or the Illinois Department of Human Rights. And, just in case, you can copy down that email address or that phone number if you happen to face some sort of discrimination. Okay, next slide. So protections for tenants with disabilities. You have the right to request a reasonable accommodation. So you can request a change to a policy or practice to allow you equal access to housing, such as a closer or wider parking spots. You can request physical modifications to the rental unit to allow you equal access, such as bars in the bathroom. So, sex and gender protections. It is illegal for a landlord to make any unwelcome sexually advances on a tenant, coerce a tenant in any way that may interfere with an individual's rental or purchase of a property, or create an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment. So the Safe Homes Act. For tenants who have been in a violent or abusing housing situation in the last 60 days, or as soon as possible if circumstances did not allow within that time frame, they and their family have the right to break their lease and leave without continuing to pay the rent. If they provide a written notice prior to vacating or within 3 days of vacating your landlord, and change the locks to keep an abuser out of a home in an emergency. So the reason for vacating the premises or changing the locks was because of domestic or sexual violence against the tenant or member of the tenant's household. The dates that the domestic or sexual violence occurred. Evidence from a doctor, court, or police, evidence of violence, or statement from an employee of a victim service or rape crisis organization. So yeah, it's really, really important to document everything as proof. Next slide, please. Immigration status disclosure and national origin protection. So immigration status is not a protected class under the fair housing laws. However, national origin is protected, but it is illegal for landlords to require tenants to provide additional fees or documentation due to perceived national origin. If landlords ask about immigration status, then they must ask for all applicants. Landlords should make sure tenants understand the lease and provide it in alternate formats. So, written in Spanish, for example. Landlord responsibilities and best practices, alternative documents. So some alternative documents can be your consulate card, your current foreign passport, an I-864 form, a school ID card with a photograph, hospital records, Chicago City key, or other options. And for the past rental history, you can use school records, letter from utility company, copy of lease, and for the creditability to pay, letter from your employer or resident pay stub, sponsorship letter, or Form I-864 or Section 8 voucher. Just Housing Amendment, Cook County. It protects tenants from discrimination based on their criminal record. Landlords cannot deny rental applications based on the applicant's criminal history. This includes arrests, citations, juvenile records, or most convictions over 3 years old. Landlords can consider an applicant's conviction records from the last 3 years, but only once they've given the applicant a chance to share additional clarifying information about their record. The Immigrant Tenant Protection Act. This law went into effect in August 2019. In Illinois, landlords cannot threaten or evict tenants because of their immigration status. So how does that protect immigrant tenants? So your landlord may not threaten to call ICE, increase your rent, evict you, or shut off utilities for exercising your rights. It protects people of any immigration status who are currently renting. It protects everyone living with the tenants, not just the people named on the lease. And it protects tenants with verbal lease agreements, not just written agreements. And that's a really, really good point, because a lot of the families that we happen to work with have verbal leases. What if my landlord threatens or evicts me because of my immigration status? So you can contact an attorney right away. And here we have some information with the attorney you can contact. If you win a lawsuit against your landlord, you can win money to pay for any damages, additional $2,000 for each incident, and money to pay for your lawyer. Discussing or even mentioning the tenant's immigration or citizenship status in civil proceedings is prohibited and irrelevant unless the tenant mentions it or is otherwise necessary to comply with federal law. So it does have some limitations. It does not cover people applying for new housing. It does not cover federally funded housing that requires landlords to check status. Landlords may ask for information necessary for credit check before renting a unit, and tenants must continue paying rent until they move. So here's another scenario. My landlord told us that we have to move out in 2 weeks and threatened to call ICE, even though our lease doesn't end until December. So, how does the ITPA protect me? A, I can contact an attorney and file a civil lawsuit claiming discrimination. B, I can stop paying rent and terminate my lease. Or C, I can reduce my rent to reflect emotional damages. So if you want to try to guess and write it down, ooh, Wendy's ahead of the game. Okay, next slide. A. For assistance with ITPA cases, contact, and then there's their information again. Yeah, Wendy, you're on a roll. Okay, next slide, please. So, free translation and interpretation services. All individuals have the right to request an interpreter in any Illinois court when they check in with the clerk for civil cases. Landlords should make sure tenants understand the lease and provide it in alternate formats. And if a prospective tenant brings an interpreter translator, landlords must work with the interpreter translator. So, next slide. So here's another scenario. I am at court and need an interpreter, but there is not one available. What can I do? A, I have to continue with my case and try to understand as best as I can. B, I can have my case rescheduled to a time when there is an interpreter available. Or C, I have to pay someone to interpret for me during the case. Wendy says B. Okay. Next slide, please. Yeah, it's B. I can have my case rescheduled to a time when there is an interpreter available. So, rental and mortgage assistance and public charge. So, what is public charge? Public charge is part of immigration law that applies to certain immigrants seeking legal permanent status or a visa to enter the US to see if they are likely to use certain public benefits in the future. So, how do immigration officials determine if a person is a public charge? Immigration officials review a person's age, income, health, education, skills, financial sponsor, and personal use of certain public programs through the I-944 form. So some changes to the public law charge. As of March 9, 2021, the 2019 public charge rule change is permanently blocked nationwide. So applications for legal residency will not be affected by the use of SNAP, Section 8, public housing, and Medicaid, with the exception of long-term institute. That word. Next slide. Changes to the public charge. So families should not be afraid to access services and programs for which they are eligible. Now, the public charge rule only counts federal, state, and local cash programs for income maintenance. Long-term, that word, paid for by the government. So the nursing home care paid for by the government. And public charge does not apply to persons with a U or T visa, asylum or refugee status, special immigrant juvenile status, or those applying for U.S. citizenship, green card renewal, DACA, or TPS. For more information, you can visit this website and the email address. Public housing assistance and immigration status. So, undocumented immigrants are not eligible for Section 8 and federal public housing programs, but they are allowed to live with family members who are eligible. Federal Section 8 and public housing benefits received by U.S. citizen, legal permanent residents, or other eligible immigrant children and family members does not affect undocumented family members adjusting to legal status. So, emergency rental, mortgage, utility, and cash assistance does not affect immigrants adjusting status in the future. So this is some information about the eviction moratorium. It expired on October 3rd, 2021. Enforcement of court-approved eviction orders by law enforcement is prohibited until October 3rd. Landlords can file evictions in court, and there is a court-based rental assistance program through IDHS for evictions against covered persons. And here are some eligibility requirements. So you can't earn more than 99,000 in annual income. And these are some of the qualifications, like if you were unable to make full rent or housing payment due to some hardships related to COVID-19. And this includes the loss of a job, loss of hours, or increase in out-of-pocket expenses that are directly related to COVID-19. Using best efforts to make timely partial payments as close to full payments as individual circumstances permit, taking into account other non-discretionary expenses. And eviction would render homeless or forced to move in, live in close quarters with others. So this is how the form looks like. You have the box at the top, and then it has all the information that I had just read below on the previous slide, and then your signature and the date go on the bottom. So recommendations for immigrant tenants. So you can sign 2 copies of the declaration form, which we saw on the previous slide. You can keep one for yourself and then send the other one to the landlord. And it could be either an email form and or signed through certified mail to the landlord. But make sure you keep that copy for yourself. Rental assistance available through IDHS. So it's open to all tenants, regardless of immigration status. Eligibility, a tenant who is behind on rent and or at risk of homelessness or housing instability because they have faced a loss or reduction of work income due to COVID-19 and are below the income limit. To apply, contact an IDHS service provider. So you can have the website and check it out right there. IllinoisRentalAssistance.org/providers. Housing legal assistance available regardless of immigration status. So we have the ITPA, the Assistance for Survivors of Domestic and or Sexual Violence. Mi Mujeres, Eviction Assistance in Illinois, Eviction Help Illinois, and Disability-Based Discrimination, Access Living. So yeah, you can copy those numbers down. Okay, next slide, please. And this is the contact information for the people that made the PowerPoint presentation. But if you're interested in receiving services from Erie House, you can leave your name and your contact info on the chat. Next slide, please. And yeah, any questions?
Thank you, Anna, for the presentation. Does anybody have any questions? You could type them up in the chat, or you could just open up your microphone at this time.
Oh, thank you, Wendy.
Okay, seems like we have no questions. Thank you, Anna, for the presentation. I think that was very well explained, and even our participants agree with that. So if that's everything, we're going to go ahead and close up this presentation. Thank you again for joining us on our Tenants Right workshop with Erie House, brought to you by Face-to-Face Virtual Programming. Thank you for joining us and have a great day.